You're listening to The Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips, where we present audiobook quality readings of the classics for your enjoyment. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, just because you're a bumpkin doesn't mean you can't be cultured. Okay, we are live. Welcome to The Cultured Bumpkin, and today we have Melanie. Mel, what do you go by?
Either one.
Okay. Well, my phone's ringing. Sorry. Good deal. Well, so I found Melanie on TikTok, and I don't remember what it was, but I remember you did a reading, I think, of maybe a Shakespeare monologue, and then had just like this really good analysis that was easy to understand.
Great, thank you.
and so I am, I really like that, and wanted to talk about it some more.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
So first, if I can keep my phone from dinging, I'm just going to ask you this. Can you tell us, tell us a little about yourself and how did you develop a love of literature?
All right. So I am a high school teacher. I teach 11th grade academic honors and AP. I've been doing that for about 13 years now. I wish this was hyperbole, but I think I fell in love with books because my mom would lock me in my room. We'd come home from church on Sunday and she was like, take a nap. And then she knew I wouldn't take a nap. And so she was like, I don't care. Just don't leave the room. And it would just be me and my books. And so I just absolutely started devouring things. I remember, I think the first real memory is elementary school, and I was taking home all the Little House on the Prairie books. Nice. Every single Friday, I would take home one, and I would read it over the weekend. I'd bring it back, and so that was really where it began. And children's literature certainly had a big impact on me. But I discovered Shakespeare. I think I was taught Romeo and Juliet in high school the way a lot of kids are. With very broad strokes that don't really get to the heart of what makes it a great play. And then it wasn't really until college where I started to really fall in love with the language. And that really helped with the moment I just watched a production with the subtitles on. It was like a click, and it just started to make so much more sense. And I realized what a role the acting had in terms of it, right? That it can't just be read. It has to be seen. And so that was just the beginning of an absolute obsession of mine with Shakespeare. And at first I wanted to go to graduate school to be a writer. But then I started substitute teaching just kind of, for the money, which is not really a great way to get money, but and I just fell in love with the kids, and here we are.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so the other day I was talking with a friend of mine. We were actually out to eat, and he's kind of a creative muse, you might say. So we just hang out from time to time and talk about Shakespeare and poetry, and just a nice time. So we're talking, and this lady overhears us talking about Shakespeare, and she's like, I've always why would anybody do that? Why would I? And it wasn't in a mean way, but she was like, how are two people in the 21st century, like grown men, talking about this? What is it about Shakespeare that I would need? Like, why would I want to do that? And it made me think. I wanted to ask you that. What would you say to someone as far as, here's why you should explore Shakespeare?
So the thing I think that is the most important thing about literature is empathy, right? It fosters empathy. And when you spend a lot of time watching that either develop with young people or not develop, you realize that it's a big part of having an imagination. It's a big part of drawing connections. It's a big part of being curious. And Shakespeare has a way of sort of depicting every possible emotion that you could have as a human being. And there are many, many great writers who have captured certain emotional circumstances. Definitely many great writers that have shown us what it feels like to be this or that. I don't really feel like there's any author on the same level with Shakespeare in terms of what it means to be alive, what it means to be human. And there are just moments where I'm with my students and like we're reading Othello and we are reading about the poor love-struck Bianca who's chasing after Cassio. And one of my students, I go, I've been this girl. Have any of us been this girl? And one girl in the class was like, Miss Murray, I am this girl, and we just all, and so when you see that, that's the real key. It's being able to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. It's about recognizing something universal and timeless, that people back then are the same as they are now. And that Shakespeare has a way of conveying that in a way that I think a lot of other authors are a little bit more trapped by their time period. So even for instance, when you read Jane Eyre, there's a way of language that Charlotte Bronte has that's very analytical. It's very sort of detached. She sort of reports what's happening in a very, very lofty way. And Shakespeare is tricky to understand too. But when you see it, it's just timeless and it will always be so real, And so I think if you can get over the language difficulty, which is a real thing, which is definitely a valid stumbling block, and I think drives a lot of people away from it, then you just get to this treasure trove of just, every possible flavor, that you could ever look for in terms of what it means to have a beating heart and to be a living human being.
That's awesome. I like that. I like that answer. I said something to her similar, but it didn't sound nearly that good. But
I'm sure it did.
But,
you have a great way of communicating yourself.
Yeah. Something to the effect of like, somewhere in Shakespeare's plays, somebody's going through what you're going through.
Yeah, exactly. That's a simpler way of what I said, which is much better. That's much more concise. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and it's not about how realistic the scenarios are. It's not about, the judgment calls of these characters. It's just about going along for the ride and feeling something, even if that's going to be frustration and discomfort and anger, because those are all really important emotions too. And if you can discover those in literature, then you can discover them when you're reading something about history or when you're reading the news and you're experiencing the plight of someone else, and that is an important part of being human, being able to connect.
Right.
And so that's enormous.
What is your favorite play? Like if you're stuck on a desert island and there's one play at the amphitheater, what'll it be?
Oh man. I feel like it's easy and cheap. Romeo and Juliet is one of my favorites. Maybe my favorite because it is a tragic comedy. And so I love King Lear, but King Lear can be very heavy. I love Hamlet, but Hamlet can be very heavy. I feel like with Romeo and Juliet, you get this wonderful mix of both. The first half can be very hilarious. And the second half can really actually be quite funny too. The scene where the friar is like, keeps saying the word banished and Romeo's like, stop saying the word, stop saying it. He's like, why don't you read a book if you're upset? Here's some books, like it's funny. So that's a big one. I love Othello just because it's so sad. I love Henry V too. Sorry, I know that's not much of a desert island list. That's but if I had a top 5.
Okay.
I do love the tragedies. Much Ado About Nothing is probably my favorite comedy.
Okay.
By far. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Good deal. Yeah, you almost have to narrow it down to what's your favorite, like comedy, tragedy, whatever.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I think for me, in a way, Henry V was one of my first times that I felt like, oh, I kind of know what that's like, because I was sort of introduced to it in the Army. So I was an Army officer, and it obviously he's the king. It was a bigger scale on his part, but that sort of idea of, these guys are, napping here, and I'm not going to get any sleep tonight. I gotta deal with problems, that kind of thing. And that made me want to explore some of his other stuff.
Yeah. And his work with with characters who are soldiers is really, I mean, that's why Much Ado About Nothing is so great, because you have these guys have just finished fighting a war, right? Now they're done. What happens when they come back home and they're, you know, they're fresh off the battlefield and they have these, you know, issues to deal with? Or in Othello, what happens when soldiers betray each other? You know, Shakespeare has this beautiful way of portraying soldiers, which is uncanny considering that he was just a, you know, glove maker's son from the country, and
Right.
he didn't serve himself, you know, but he obviously talked to people and got wonderful inspiration because he just portrays that bond,
Right.
and what happens when that bond is broken too, you know, which is what makes it so sad.
Right.
You know?
The
Yeah.
his character is so real. Like in, let's say, you can watch a movie or something and you'll see someone in a field that maybe you know a lot about, and you think, oh, this is hard to watch. This is so awful. That's not how it is. In Shakespeare, it's just not like that.
Mhm.
You know, in my case, like with soldiers, the things the soldiers say, and I know that the words are different maybe, but that attitude being there, like the king said to all these commoners, this day shall gentle his condition. And there's something about going through hardship with a group of anybody that just it it bonds you together in
Yeah.
a way that few things do.
Yeah.
Any kind of life-threatening situation, you could be a first responder, or working on an oil rig, but I mean, if you go through a life-threatening situation with somebody, it's like you don't care as much about where they came from after
Mhm.
that, and I
Mhm.
love that.
And that's why, you know, I'm a big sucker for Band of Brothers on HBO, and of course,
Mhm.
obviously, Band of Brothers is taken right from Henry V, which is absolutely the perfect way to describe it. You know,
Yeah.
and you have these stories of these soldiers that are still signing off their letters, "Your forever soldier," you know, 50 years later, and
Mhm.
they're just so bonded, even if they don't see each other for like 20 years, they are still so tight, you know, and um, and that's why I love teaching Othello. I think because for Shakespeare to show what happens when that bond is broken and when someone violates that bond and there's betrayal, in my opinion, it's the saddest one. It's sadder than Romeo and Juliet. You know,
Mm.
it's just like, no, you guys are supposed to be there for each other. Why are you doing this? You know, yeah, it's just great. And I think, yeah, like you said, he has this genius of emotion. You know, it's like if you compare him to other geniuses in different fields, he has this way of just putting the human soul on paper. And seeming to understand us, you know, and understand what it's like to be alive, no matter what kind of, you know, he writes these women that are no man should be writing women this good. It doesn't
Right.
make sense, you know, for him to be writing such full dynamic characters, and somehow he does, you know. So my money is that he was somehow like a photographic memory, and that he just talked to everyone he could, and he just had amazing insight into what it must feel like, you know, and this enormous empathy, you know, that he just had for the human condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've never read a Shakespeare play. They don't really know Shakespeare, but let's say they hear you on this podcast and they're like, you know what? I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of want to maybe explore a little bit. How would you recommend they go about exploring Shakespeare?
So that's a good one. I mean, part of me is tempted to say just start with one of his shorter ones, like Macbeth. You know, that one's significantly smaller than his other works, but still, um, I
Mhm.
I don't think there's any shame in using something like No Fear Shakespeare, because it does take a lot of practice to get used to the syntax, to get used to the vocabulary and the word choice. Um, and you know, it's something that has to be studied before it can really be enjoyed. You know, you sort of have to earn your way to a place where you can get comfortable enough with it to watch it, and for it to start to actually feel like second nature, and for it to feel like English the way modern English does. Um, but I would say, you know, commit to maybe the sonnets first. You know, the poetry is really nice because a sonnet has a pretty basic structure where the beginning part is sort of like contrary, you know, my mistress eyes are nothing like the sun. She's not beautiful. She doesn't have nice skin. Her hair's not that great, but I love her more than anyone else, right? Or Sonnet 29, right? Sometimes I think about my life and it really, really sucks. And I wish that I had that guy's life and that guy's life. But, you know, and so once you start to get patterns into how the structure works, I feel like that can be a little foot in the door. But honestly, for me, it was a big magical moment. I was watching the 1996 Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it was the morning after the party when Romeo is trying to trick his, you know, lie and say that he was getting it on with Rosalind the night before so that he won't have to admit he's actually in love. And when he says, "Why is my pump well flowered?" he grabs his crotch. And so he acts that out for us, you know, and an actor is supposed to be kind of like a teacher. They should be a strong enough actor to help us understand what's being said. And so that's a huge part of it, you know, not just trying to sit down and read it, because that's not really how it's supposed to go, right? Maybe having the book in front of you and just watching it and watching really carefully what they do. And if you can keep up with how they seem to feel, then if it's every eighth word, that's a start, you know, where you're like, oh, okay, I understand. Let me go with him. That makes sense, right? I understand you are a senator, you know, and just starting to let yourself have those moments where you're like, yeah, that makes sense to me. I understand that. I may not have understood that whole big speech before that, but I remember the last line and I know that makes sense. And so it just takes a little patience. It does take some practice. It's certainly, you know, sometimes I have a student that's like, "Miss Murray, I don't get what the big deal is. This is easy," but that doesn't really happen very often. You know, you really have to just look for the gems. And so every now and then you just look for the things where you're like, hey, that's like what I would say. That's like what a person today would say. Okay. You know, and you let yourself have that. And even if you don't understand every single word, you can just let it wash over you, you know?
Okay.
And so it's really about the feeling. I think if you can just keep up with the emotion, you don't have to even really understand all the words, because you're still where you're supposed to be. You're where Shakespeare wants you to be emotionally with it.
Okay, that makes sense. So in that case, with regard to like watching a production, what are some of like your maybe favorite productions that someone could probably find on
Ooh.
you know, streaming or something that they
Yeah,
go
that's
to?
great because, you know, before the pandemic, it was really hard to find stage performances of Shakespeare. The Globe makes them very expensive or they don't make them available at all. And then during the pandemic, suddenly all of this Broadway and all this theater started becoming much more available. So Broadway HD and Marquee TV on Amazon. I can't believe I'm plugging channels on Amazon, but I am. Those are great places to find some plays. Um, there is a very great 2007 Othello that's wonderful, where it's clear. And, you know, when I gave my students that and gave them a choice between that one and like the movie version with Lawrence Fishburne in it, a lot of times they actually preferred the stage,
Hmm.
because they felt like the acting was better, you know. And I was like, well, it is, you know, they're doing much, much, much harder work, you know, on the stage than they are. Um, but yeah, I would just, you know, I would say this is going to sound weird, but I would say to maybe avoid comedies because the comedies tend to be a little faster and the language is much more clever and the jokes are trickier than the serious stuff. You know, there's a lot more plot exposition in something like Richard III than there is in Much Ado, where they're like, hey, witty thing, witty, 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 and nobody understands what the hell they're talking about because we weren't alive in 1601.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the comedies are certainly more of a challenge, which is usually why the tragedies are taught more in high school. You
Okay.
know, the kids are going to get Lear and Hamlet and Julius Caesar and Romeo and Juliet and stuff like that.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Hmm. Okay, so this is more random. King Lear.
Mm.
If you as far as different characters, I haven't watched, you know, every production ever made or anything, but what I enjoy doing, you know, for like an acting challenge or something is say, okay, I'm going to find this monologue and then just go look and see how different people have done it.
Yeah.
You know, just, and a lot of times they're totally different even if they're all brilliant. It's not like
Mhm.
one's bad. It's just, oh, that's a whole different take on it.
Yeah.
Um, but King Lear, you know, have you seen the Anthony Hopkins
Yeah.
production?
Makes
So
me cry my
yeah,
eyes out.
yeah. What did you who's your favorite Lear, I guess?
Oh God. All right. So on YouTube, you can watch the I want to say it's like 1976 Public Theater King Lear with James Earl Jones,
Okay.
um, and freaking Raul Julia as Edmund, and he is so great. Paul Sorvino is Gloucester. Um, so James Earl Jones really is kind of sort of known for his Lear, because that particular performance, as far as I know, in the theater world, is considered sort of the top. But I got to go with Hopkins. I mean, I know that that Amazon Prime version is very trimmed down. It's a really, really cut version of the play, but he's my favorite Shakespearean, hands down. Ian McKellen, don't get me wrong, Patrick Stewart, they're great, but I just have a real soft spot for him ever since I saw Julie Taymor's Titus with him playing Andronicus.
Okay.
I got it. Yeah, Hopkins just kills me. He just breaks my heart.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's my favorite Lear, I think.
That's good. That's good. I think that he's mine, but I couldn't tell you why. It's just I like that.
Yeah, there's
uh,
just something about him
yeah.
that's just, McKellen, I think, does a very great job in his, but that one is also just a lot longer. And so maybe that's something about it. There's a stamina that's required in a certain production
Yeah.
that's maybe not as required in another. But yeah, oh, Hopkins can do no wrong in my mind.
Okay.
He's definitely top for me.
Yeah, I think especially like the scene where, you know, they basically bring Cordelia up and she's dead, and the way that he reacts to it, it is more like a madman's reaction.
Yes.
There's not like this, like, oh, I would grieve like that because I'm normal and so is he. It's like, oh, that's a little
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
nuts. Like
Yeah.
that was one of the times where if you weren't convinced he's dark raven mad, now we are.
Absolutely. Totally. And he brings that same energy in Titus, because he's doing this charade of insanity in that. Or is it a charade? You're not entirely sure if it's yeah, and there's just something about, and it seems weird to even compare these two because like even Judi Dench lays prostrate in front of Ian McKellen. Even she is like, he's above me. And I'm like, I'm not sure that he is Judy,
Right.
like but yeah, I mean, they're both great, like you said, for their own reasons, and then when you think about things like Hamlet, right, when Benedict Cumberbatch's To Be or Not to Be is a minute and a half shorter than Andrew Scott's. It's the
Really?
same speech, right? But one of them drags it out, really draws it out and uses the time, and the other one doesn't, and it's just a directorial choice or a creative choice, whatever it is.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I love Andrew Scott's version with that regional, I guess Irish, some kind of Irish accent.
Mhm.
And I always think regional accents sort of make it, it almost makes you hear it again for the first time, just with the different, lilting of the language and whatnot. I really like
Exactly.
that stuff. Where do you know where there's, I've seen clips of Andrew Scott, but I've never seen a whole, is there a production of it anywhere that you know of?
I have looked for it. I don't think I want to say that it was aired on BBC. So, but I believe that I've done a search and I have ended up with a brick wall. Yeah, I think you
Okay.
can only see clips of it, which is really a shame.
Okay.
Because yeah, he does that twitchy, I haven't slept in a couple days, I need a shower kind of Hamlet, where you're like, all right, dude, calm down, like he's the little, you know, so it's great. But yeah, I always mispronounce his last name, but Papa Asieju in a Royal Shakespeare version. That one is on Marquee TV, and that one has a very like Black Panther feel to it. There's a lot of Basquiat-esque graffiti. It's an all African production. It's very cool.
Okay.
And Papa Asieju is just an absolutely insane Hamlet. He has tears running down his face almost the entire play. I don't even know how he manages to stay hydrated. Like he's just crying the whole way through. It's absolutely crazy.
Wow.
And like you said, very different, but very special in its own way.
That's really cool. I've seen a couple of I think like YouTube clips of that one, but I've never seen it at length. And
Yeah,
like,
that full production is available if anyone wants to find it.
okay. I need to check that out. Benedict Cumberbatch said the thing that's cool about theater is that it only lives in your imagination. And that's cool. I guess so maybe it's by design. We're only getting clips here and there. There's only a few people that truly got to experience that moment or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it sucks for the rest of us, but I guess he's got a point,
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, right? Like, the rest of us are kind of left out, but that's fine,
Yeah. So what about other classic literature, not necessarily Shakespeare? What other things do you like or you would point people toward?
So, okay. So I did just finish reading Jane Eyre recently, and of course,
Oh, nice.
I just like, I'm such a sap. I cry all the time. Like everything makes me cry. But it's such a beautiful depiction of like a real love, as opposed to a lot of the kind of gothic ideas at the time. Even Wuthering Heights, doesn't quite, I don't know, doesn't quite get to that place of depth for me. So I love Jane Eyre. That's always one of my favorite love stories. But I actually, I actually have been obsessed with a series lately that is not very high literature, but it's the Matthew Corbett detective series by Robert McCammon. And he's like a detective in 1703, but he's not really a detective because that word hasn't been invented yet. And the very, very last one is about to come out, and I'm really sad because there's 10 of them. And I normally don't do series like this. Like it's super cheesy. It's not great, super,
Right.
but like there's all this scary stuff going on the front. I'm so excited. So that's like my brain break when I need to stop. But yes, I am a big Vonnegut fan. I love Kurt Vonnegut. I think I was given God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater in college, and that really turned me on to him. And then I read Galapagos, and I was like completely obsessed. He's so funny. And I even brought his book one night backstage when we were doing As You Like It, because I was Audrey, and Audrey has a lot of time off stage, and I couldn't even read it backstage because I was laughing too hard. I was like disrupting everyone. I mean, so I love Vonnegut. He's perfect satire. And another American author I love is Raymond Carver.
Okay.
He was a wonderful short story author. And he was very minimalist, and he sort of took the style sort of created by Hemingway with this journalistic minimal, and just kind of ran with it and sort of, I think, improved upon it, honestly, a little bit. Also a raving alcoholic like Hemingway, of course.
Okay.
But there seems to be something about American short story authors. But yeah, those guys were all introduced to me in college, and I really, really fell in love with just short fiction. I feel like it's an overlooked genre, and it doesn't get as much credit as it deserves.
I think I 100% agree. And I think the reason that I got into short fiction is because, like, I don't know if I want to read, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, but I'll read Buying Gloves in Gibraltar, which is like, 2 minutes long and hilarious.
Yeah.
By Mark Twain or whatever. And I love short stories for that reason. But then, it's like you can take a thought from beginning to end and sort of be a better person for it without having to spend a week or 2 weeks, which is great in its own. But sometimes it's nice to just go, start to finish. We're done with it.
Yeah. And it's really nice when a collection is sort of cohesive, like In Our Time by Hemingway feels very much like it's largely all about the same character. And so he sort of bent the genre a little by being like, I don't know, is this a novel? Is this not a novel? Is this just a collection? And And it was really lovely to be able to examine it as a whole, but also still understand that it wasn't a novel and you're not applying that same kind of thought to it. Um, and that one just has absolutely beautiful, beautiful, sad Hemingway stories in it, of
Right.
course. Um, but yeah, definitely. I think I took, my creative writing classes in college were very largely geared towards poetry and short fiction. And we were, of course, assigned to write short fiction, not to start trying to write novels. And we actually weren't allowed to write things with detectives in them or anything with science fiction or fantasy. Like we had to write literary short fiction about like ordinary people with ordinary problems. And that was really, really hard for a lot of my classmates. Like we would have our circle and some guy would bring in a story that was like, Detective Jack Ronson had a long week. And we're like, no, this is like, like that's not gonna work here. That's great, but that's not like literary. And it feels so snobby now looking back on it, but I think it's an important distinction.
That's interesting. Have you ever heard of Ricky Gervais talk about that, what you just said?
I don't think I've heard him talk about it. No.
So I really like him as just a comedian. I think he's
Yeah.
hilarious, a great writer
Yeah.
on screen. And he mentioned in school, he was always trying to write like these big exciting things, detectives and stuff.
Mhm.
And he would always, the teacher would always just tear him up, put all this red on there. And the teacher said, you have to write what you know. Just stop pretending. Just tell me a story about your life.
That's a
And
really good
so
point.
he got mad. He was like, I'll show this guy. And he started writing, and he wrote, he and his mom used to go to the elderly neighbors across the street and take her, like, you make sure the temperature is fine and she had her water and just take care of her, just be
Mhm.
good people. And so he was like, we walked up to the door. We rattled the keys in the lock. We walked in. It smelled of lavender and weird old lady smells. She was sitting in her chair and smiled at us, or something. And then he was like, he's gonna hate this, and he turned it in. And the next day the guy came back and it was like 100, and he had like a lump in his throat. The teacher who had been just tearing
Yeah.
him up, and he tried to speak, and he was just like, "That's good," and walked on.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much exactly what happens to Jo March in Little Women, right? She's writing these stories about dark, dastardly deeds and men in dark capes, and when Friedrich Baer tells her, you must write from life, you must write from the depths of your soul, she gets so mad at him, and they have this little breakup, right? And then she goes home and she writes Little Women, and she writes the story of her family and her own life. And it's beautiful and it sells for $5 whole,
Right.
and it's a huge deal. Yeah, I do tend to love stories about women. I love women authors. I love Eudora Welty. um, Edith Wharton breaks my heart. I feel like the House of Mirth is on Shakespeare level in terms of absolute tragedies. I mean, it's just so sad. And it's such an indictment of high society and the things that control what women can do and what women can be. And that was another one. I thank God for my college professors who chose good curriculum for us. I mean, geez, I'm really glad.
That's I'm from a part of Mississippi that's Eudora Welty's very big. She's from Mississippi.
Mhm.
Um, but I've recently bought my first book by her, but I've never read her. So
Mm.
tell me what I need to, like, guide me. What do I need to do
Okay, I'm gonna
with
have to
Eudora
look back
Welty?
on and see exactly what it was that was the first thing I read by her. Um, okay, this is going back a little. I shouldn't have even said Eudora because that is going back a long time ago. It was a short story. If I can find the collection, I'll definitely give you the title. Um, Let me think. Okay, it was. Sorry. Another one to fill up the time would be Flannery O'Connor. She's another great Southern
Okay, right.
writer. Um, I have to say, I think it was the Golden Apples. That collection was great. I would start with her short fiction, But she also has books about writing, which is really kind of cool too.
Okay.
She's got a book called On Writing. She's got there was a story and essays collection that they put out posthumously. Um, and yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, 13 Stories is a great one. I don't even know where to start. Honestly, there's so many. But yeah, The Golden Apples was my first introduction to her with that collection.
Okay.
But I mean, I would honestly just start with the beginning, and go all the way back to the beginning. So A Curtain of Green from 1941 is a pretty good place to start.
Okay.
And then you can just go down the rabbit hole because she's got so many, she's very, very prolific.
Right. Okay.
But yeah.
Good deal. Good
Yeah.
deal. Now, you mentioned women writers. What are some, what are some other ones that you enjoy that you might share with the folks that maybe have not heard of, including myself, that may not have even heard of them or maybe haven't read them?
Well, I mean, Toni Morrison is immensely important. And it's funny because sometimes I don't often use the word important. Like I think Shakespeare is important. I think Toni Morrison is really important. It's great that books like Beloved are on high school curriculum. It's wonderful that that book is still very alive and still very potent. But the Bluest Eye, her very first novel, I honestly feel like every human being alive should have to read it. I mean, it's just crushing. It's absolutely beautiful. And it really makes you think about beauty standards of, white beauty standards, and how that affects Black girls and Black women as they grow up. It really will open your eyes to the experience of someone else. And it really, really hit hard. That one was big. There's another new author. Her name is Attica Locke, and she wrote a series that starts. One of the books is Heaven, My Home. It takes place in Texas, and it's about a Black ranger. And it takes place like in 2016, right at the beginning of the Trump years. And it's a very, very cool study in race in a more modern context. Alice Walker, The Color Purple, is really important. Zora Neale Hurston. I'm pretty sure a lot of kids still read Their Eyes Were Watching God in school, but I cannot recommend that one enough. That's important. I just think there's something really important about reading Black women's literature. And like we said, with that empathy and with that imagination. And for a lot of white readers, especially, I think it's really important to walk in the shoes of these women and these characters and see through their eyes. And the last one I'll recommend is Jamaica Kincaid. She does not get enough credit. She's got really beautiful short stories as well. There's one in particular called Girl. That one I will never forget. I read that in college and I have it practically memorized. I can't get it out of my head. So yeah, Jamaica Kincaid. She's fantastic.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Thank you.
Great, no problem.
Let's see. This has been great. I've really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I have too.
All over the place, but I could spend hours asking you, what do you think about this? What do you think about
yeah. I could spend hours trying to come up with things off the top of my head because it helps me remember that I do remember some stuff after all, actually.
Right. But I was wondering if you could do, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could do like a monologue, maybe walk us through it and then either quote it or read it if you're able, like if you have the setup for it or, don't mind doing that.
Okay. You know what? I feel like since you were asking about Shakespeare and how we can make Shakespeare accessible and how we can access Shakespeare, I would really love to do the prologue from Romeo and Juliet, if you don't mind.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Because, I feel like with a play like this, he gives us this little gift in the beginning. He tells us exactly what's going to happen. He tells us what the plot is, why it's going to happen. And I feel like, Romeo and Juliet has sort of been like kind of like the opposite of a time capsule. Its meaning and its relationship to modern audiences seems to change depending on what those audiences need, and so if, like, I noticed post Me Too, people needed to make Romeo a bad guy.
Right.
They needed to make him into some kind of predatory, untrustworthy bad guy, um, in this weird service of protecting Juliet, and I think by extension protecting girls, and I feel like that was much more a reflection of us than it was of anything that Shakespeare intended. But so one of the things I think, if anyone is listening and is as like, I, how do I get started with Shakespeare? It's important to know sometimes he really does tell us exactly what he's going to do. So and he doesn't do prologues with a lot of his plays. He just walks into them sometimes, and you start right in the middle. All right, so let me see. I think I do have this one memorized. Okay. 2 households, both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, the which of you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So when you think about it in terms of theater, it has its own value. When you think about it in terms of plot, it has its own value. And so he tells us from the beginning that we have 2 families of equal standing. They're both rich. In this beautiful city, Verona, where we're going to lay our scene. And they have been fighting forever, and they are still fighting now, from ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. So the people of the city are suffering. The citizens are fed up with this. And this is the most important part, I think, for me. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. Even just the idea of fatal loins is such a paradox, right? The loins are where the child is born from. The idea of birth and death smack together like that. Shakespeare loves opposites, and nowhere else do you see this as strongly as in this. It's all about 2s. It's all about opposites. It's all about things that shouldn't go together, like love and death, like children and marriage, things that shouldn't go together. And so there's even this point, where it says, here's what's going to happen. They're destined to die because it's the only thing that's going to end the hatred between the families. And this is how it's all going to work out. These families will make peace. It's going to be sad. It's going to be about 2 hours long. And we hope we do a good job. If you don't quite get it, we're going to try really hard to make sure you get it, And so it's a little cheeky way of Shakespeare, the actor, also talking to the audience a little bit, And so that's why I think it's so important that we remember that it is theater, that it is drama. And so we should read it the way we would read Fences, where we would want to see an actor playing this out. We would want to see 2 people performing this. And it's not really going to do justice just to read it off the page, because it's all, like you said, it's about every little moment of emphasis, every little rise in volume, every little gesture, builds on that. So
Right. That's awesome. When I was in the Army, this was the first play that I ever saw, and I saw it. My platoon sergeant, so I was a platoon leader. My platoon sergeant's wife went out of town, and they had season tickets to the theater, and he was like, "Hey, my wife's out of town. You want to go as my, go as my date?" And I was like, "Okay, why not?"
Fantastic.
So I was actually on a date. We're both straight men, but we're on a date together, and so I Romeo and Juliet, and that was when I fell in love. One of the moments where I was like, "Oh man, this is good."
Yeah.
And yeah,
it's just it takes a lot from the actor. It's just wonderful, and if it's done really well, it's really hard to not do it well, honestly. As long as you're committed to it. But yeah, I'm not even supposed to say this, but I just got the role of the nurse. The cast list hasn't been released yet, but I got it. And, and I'm just so excited because like I said, it's hard not to bond with the girl who plays Juliet,
Right.
especially when you're a little older, and
That's awesome.
it's just such an intense play, and it has so much in it, and you can do it 1,000 different ways, and it will always be brand new. So yeah, I'm really glad that Romeo and Juliet was the unlocking of the door.
Right. Yeah.
It's a really good, it's a really good starting point for everybody. It's the reason why it's the most famous. Hamlet might be the best, but Romeo and Juliet really is the one I think that draws people in the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sometime we could I could do a lot of this.
Yeah.
I enjoy hearing your takes on stuff. Where can people find you? Because I will say on TikTok, obviously, there's a lot of. I love your like your analysis with your monologue. Those are so good. I learn a lot just from watching you.
Thank you.
So where can people find you, follow your stuff?
So yeah, I'm Nurse Ratchet on TikTok. I don't do like a YouTube or a podcast or anything like that. TikTok is really my only kind of outlet for just ranting about stuff.
I'm gonna put it on the screen. Is it sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. It's Ratchet with 2 T's.
Okay, let me see.
And let me just make sure that I actually did this, because I know that ever since I had to get a new account, I had okay, so my handle is Miss Viola Swamp had a point, but that's kind of long.
Okay. Wait,
So,
okay.
But if they search Nurse Ratchet, I should come up.
Okay.
But yeah, I stole it from Miss Nelson is Missing, because that was one of my favorite books when I was a little kid. And I was making a lot of my handles based on mean fictional female teacher characters from literature and movies. So I'd already used Dolores Umbridge, and I'd already used Agatha Trunchbull. So yeah, the long handle is Miss Viola Swamp had a point, which is, now that I'm thinking about it, such a pain in the ass of a handle, but
Really
here we are.
But let me see. Let's see if we can do it. Did we get it?
Yeah, very good. That's the worst handle. I don't even know what I was thinking. I think I tried to go back in as Nurse Ratchet, and they were like, "You can't do that. That's the account we just banned." I was like, "That's right." Oh. But yeah, if people search Nurse Ratchet, they should find me.
I like.
Sorry to give the most. There you go. Yeah, that works. And I do have a backup account, so either way would be fine. They
Good
should
deal.
find me either way.
Awesome.
But thank you so much for promoting my
Absolutely. Thank you. I love following you, and I look forward to much more in the future.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jake. I had a great time.
You've been listening to The Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, would you mind going and subscribing and leaving a nice review on whatever podcast platform you heard this on? I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.